and welcome, dear listeners. You're tuning in to the ReGENERATE project podcast on regenerative agriculture. Join us as we explore new approaches to soil, landscape, and the future of farming. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Your host, Radim Kužel. So, hello. In today's episode, I welcome Sébastien Roumegous from Biospheres, the founder of Biospheres, which is a company specialized in support in regenerative farming, and they are working all around the world. Hello, Sébastien, and could you please present your company and also how you came into regenerative farming?
Thank you. Very happy to be here. So, yes, actually, Biospheres, we are the first company in Europe working on regenerative agriculture at large scale. We are working currently in about 25-30 countries around the world, mainly in Europe, but also in North Africa, India, South America, and North America. And actually, 15 years ago, when I started to work on soil fertility, soil sciences, I wanted to develop a model that can regenerate soil fertility in any kind of farming systems. And I wasn't aware at this time that I will build Biospheres. But the principle is to really focus sustainability on soils and landscape regeneration, and especially the soils because it's where nutrient availability is built for the plants, but also the immune system of any plant is built in the soil at the beginning. So the first pillar of any ecosystem regeneration, or to have a good interaction between agriculture and the environment, is made through the soils. And the good thing is when the soil is going better and is very fertile, actually the farmer can take benefit on that, make some savings, and have actually an efficient low input farming systems. So, I mean, everyone is winning. And so I really wanted to develop this kind of farming system in any situations, any kind of soils, any kind of climate, and any kind of farming system that include or not animals inside. So actually that's what we are doing at different scales, mainly for big stakeholders, big industries like Danone, Nestle, these kind of large-scale companies, but also sometimes directly with farmers, but usually large-scale farmers that really wants to optimize their farming systems. The good thing is we are affecting hundreds of thousands hectares all over this project, and it can be for like cropping system with cereals, but also trees, vineyards, vegetables, which is very nice, because that means we can apply those techniques to any kind of situations. And it's very important because actually agriculture is the industrial activity that affects the most the terrestrial ecosystems. So if we want to regenerate our ecosystems else, we really need to affect the way we farm. But we must affect the way we farm in such a way that the farmer can live from his activity and can sustain a good level of profitability over time. So that's what we are doing through experimentation, individual and collective supports, trainings, and strategical consulting services.
Mm-hmm. Your company is active on different continents, different countries. Are there any differences in regenerative approaches across the globe, or is there some similarities that you could generalize?
So actually we split the different kind of situations around the world with different factors. The first one, of course, is the climate and water availability, which is, I would say, critical. Because the way you can regenerate soil in Spain or in Morocco is completely different than if you are in Sweden or in Canada. If I take this example, that are really extreme, for instance, to regenerate the soil in Spain, we are not even using cover crops because it's so difficult to grow. We are just leaving, in some ways, weeds to grow on the crop. And that's interesting because yesterday we were together at an event organized by Soufflé Agriculture, and you had a speaker who was from Spain, and speaking specifically about that, how to get some intercropping in Spain. It's so difficult to plant a cover crop and grow it that it's better to do it with local plants that are usually weeds, but we are using it to cover the soil and produce biomass.
And they are able to grow in these difficult conditions.
which is a kind of extreme. And on the opposite side, if you see like Canada, the snow is going away, so like it's so cold during the winter that you cannot grow any other kind of cover crops than like something like gramineous, like
and also the
rye,
window, maybe the window of growing is short in Canada.
So that means the only cover crops you can do is rye that can grow again after winter, and that can overwinter. And in intermediate situation, we have much more lever to produce biomass and to cover the soil. So through this example, we can see how it's different. And that means we must be a kind of technical, flexible, and adapted. The other factor, which is very important, is the level of mechanization. In developed countries or emerging countries where farmers usually use tractors and any kind of inputs, and where the farming means mechanization, we have specific techniques with specific machines. But when the farmers are like small scale farmers that are doing like almost everything by hands, we have to change the techniques because we don't have the same ability to cover a large surface rapidly. But we have a tool which is incredible, our hands, that can do so many things compared to a machine. So that means we can handle a level of complexity in manual farmings that we cannot handle with mechanization. But that means those techniques must be interesting in terms of return. So for instance, what we do with small scale farming, and usually that's actually the farmer doesn't get a lot of money, enough to make normal living, but you are doing intercropping with something that they can sell, they can consume, because you want to valorize as much as you can the small plot they have, compared to mechanized situation where you try to have a robust system that you can scale over a large surface with the machine you have. So that's two different options. And of course, none is best than the others. It really depends our ability to put that in place. Another factor which is interesting is, do we speak about annual crop or do we speak about perennial crops? Of course, with perennial it's much more easy because we have an interrow which is fixed and we can work on that. Usually many mistakes is done in this interrow. That's crazy. Like you can be like in Spain with very dry situation, and in the middle of the summer they are using like rotary harrow twice to do what, I don't know, but like the custom is to till the soil in the middle of the summer. And it's completely unuseful. It costs, it destroys your ability to renew the soil fertility you have, but that's what's done. So then you just drive the people to do different things in this interrow, and it's very easy to tell them, okay, we can plant something in the interrow, and then you just mow it or just crush it, and actually it's less costly than going with this tillage like twice or 3 times per year. That costs, it's long, you are using the machine, consuming some fuel. So it's much more simple to work on regenerative agriculture with perennials. When we are going to like annual cropping system, it's much more complex because we are in rotation. Every rotation is different. Every year is different according to the level of rain, drought, or whatsoever. We have to change the strategy. So that means it's much more complex to train and incite people to go in this kind of agriculture in those systems, because you have changing so many factors at the same time that they feel it can be risky. Usually it's less risky, but they don't feel so because they have to learn another way of thinking. Especially regarding tillage and organic matter management. For instance, in those farming systems, people think that using the plowing machine every year is a way to secure the system, but they don't understand that making erosions or having the soil which come back to compaction after the plowing or making a plowing pan is sometimes worse than just tilling the soil with, I don't know, a chisel plowing, which is not inverting the soil profile. And in a way, the risk evaluation by conventional farmers is a kind of upside down. Everything they do is secure, and any change is risky, which is not true. Sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's not true, and that's why we need a process to go from conventional farming practices to regenerative farming practices, especially regarding low tillage strategy, and that's why the diagnosis is at the heart of regenerative agriculture. Having the ability to really characterize if the soil is fertile or not, if the landscape is functional or not, is very important, because then you can adapt your practices according to real risk and to real situations.
So that's what you are specializing in Biospheres. You're trying to follow the farmers, follow also the companies to help them to build like a more resilient and stronger sustainable system. Which are the main difficulties that you can see in farmers adopting regenerative farming practices, or what are the most common errors that you see they are making?
I think they just don't follow the basic of chemistry and physics. If we take very common situations in Europe regarding, for instance, cereal cropping systems, people are used to think that the problems they have in the field, it's about only the weather or the seeds quality or their ability to access to specific pesticides or the amount of fertilizers they can put on the field. And they really undervalue the way their soil is reacting to climate, heavy rainfall, drought, the ability of the soil to renew by himself actually the soil porosity, because you have some biological components that are like effectively driving it. So, I mean, the most common mistakes is undervalue the organic matter management as a critical tool to improve soil fertility, and so input management at the end, and so cost. They undervalue also their ability to save money by reducing soil tillage. They see that as a risk, but actually over tillage makes problem in the soil. Too less tillage can lead to compaction and can lead to yield reduction, but too much soil tillage can lead to like crust at the surface of the soil, can lead to plowing pan, can lead to over compaction at the end. So that's why the diagnosis is very important, because when you show the farmer the effect of their farming systems, and when they see that their over-tilling method is just destroying the natural ability of their soil to build a good porosity, they understand that they are just spending money to destroy their own capital. And this is a dynamic which is, I think, undervalued, because people don't know how to make a good diagnosis. They don't know what is a good structure. They don't know what does it mean to have earthworm or not in the soil. Most of the time, they dig, like they do a spade test, they see 1 or 2 earthworms, they say, I have earthworms. But actually, a good level of earthworms is at least 5 to 6 adult earthworms inside this spade test, which is a small piece of soil. Because if you want to have a natural soil porosity, you need at least 1.5 to 2 tons of earthworms per hectare, which is a kind of high level. But if you want the functionality of natural soil porosity, you need this amount of earthworms. But to get them, you need to manage properly your soil organic matter.
You need to feed them.
And you need to feed them. So it's a complete different dynamic. The first one is saying, okay, I will take this plowing pan, this plowing machine. I will use this rotary arrow, and I will make my porosity myself, which is a mechanical porosity. The other one, which wants to go in regenerative agriculture, will say, okay, I will feed my earthworms, build a strong population of earthworm, and then those earthworms will till my soil naturally. So you are just building up a biological machine, but it cannot be done like over 1 year. You need at least 3, 4, 5 years to recover a good earthworm population. So that means you have to think in middle and long term versus thinking in short term. I go in my tractor and then I plow my plot. So
you need to think about the rotation as a whole, not as a culture by culture, year by year, which is sometimes the view that some farmers have. This year I will do this, and now in spring they are thinking about what will I do next year. And some farms, they don't even have like a built rotation of crops. They just go by year, and then it's difficult, I think, to take like a look from far away and realize where are your weakness and where are your strongness points, and where you can also improve.
Yeah, but I think that's, for me, it's so difficult because we are actually speaking about brain plasticity. I think that's something people don't really understand. Going from a linear way of thinking to a systemic way of thinking where you can anticipate the effect of the interaction of several factors on your field needs a brain plasticity which is completely different than a linear one. And the brain functions with electricity. So that means brain plasticity means the way the electricity circulate. So it's even a physical change in your brain to have this ability. So that's why when we are training people, we can see that the first year, they try to understand that, but it's a kind of difficult. The second year, they start to get the point. And the third year, they understand, like intuitively what happens. And I think any farmers or agronomists that have done the pathways, the first year or the first month they were in touch with such notions. It was a kind of difficult to understand, like the effect of like the cover crop, the roots, in interaction with the cash crop, with the fertilization plan, with the tillage strategy. Like everything is a kind of, okay, I need to believe the theory, but I don't really understand it and I don't really get the point.
Sometimes there is also a lot of information, I think, in some kind of, trainings. There is too much to take and they get lost in it.
But that's because this like systemic way of thinking is a kind of difficult and they don't master all the components. So that's why there's a transition for the soils. But when you tell me, okay, what is a critical factor? Is a human factors. That the farmer and the agronomist needs to have this systemic way of thinking that helps them to, like you said, because you're a farmer yourself, or to build a crop rotation with the cover crops, the fertilization strategy, the tillage strategy that works all together. Because the output of your systems will be a fertile soil or an unfertile soil, which is very, very important. So that's why I would say education, sensibilization, and having good agronomists on the ground is so important. And that's what we lack today, I would say.
There is, I see sometimes there were some farmers making the transition into regenerative practices, and sometimes, in my opinion, they go a little bit too fast. They learn about regenerative farming, that there is something called no-till or something like that, and they see it as a solution for everything. They go full into no-till. They try to reduce directly, nitrogen fertilization, for example, and you can see sometimes they don't have good results. And there is, for me, some way to do like a more safe way in this transition. And I think you work with this. Is there some way to like more securely, more safely go into regenerative farming than to just go directly into no-till?
Yeah, actually, So we go back to this systemic way of thinking, because changing one factor is really a linear way to change things. Okay, I will go into no-till, or I want to reduce nitrogen. So that's recipes that usually doesn't work, because you are changing just one factor and you don't understand the interaction between stopping the tillage and the compaction risk. So that's why I said the ability to diagnose properly the soil is very important, because your ability to reduce some production factors such as tillage and fertilization is strongly connected to your soil inner fertility. So that means, according to the soil biological status, we can reduce soil tillage safely. If a soil have a certain amount of organic matter, let's say like less than 2%, usually the biological activity is a kind of low. So that means we have to support soil porosity with, for instance, chisel plowing, which is like a non-inverted tillage strategy, to secure soil porosity while you are not disturbing too much the soil. And finding a way to support the inability of your soil to properly create this porosity without disturbing its ability to renew the biological content, because of course in the same time you have to use cover crops and manage well organic matter, is the balance a farmer that wants to transition must do. So we usually say, and we can see that with this example, the first step is getting this organical or biological status, which means at least 1.5 tons of earthworm per hectare, a good biological activity, especially microbes, that we can monitor with specific analysis. And actually, to get that, the best way is to have a humic balance, the proper humic balance, I would say, which is at least 15 tons of dry matter per hectare and per year, which is the amount of carbon you have to put on your soil to get more than 2.5-3% of organic matter after 15 years maybe. But if you are feeding the soil with 15 tons of dry matter every year, that means even if your soil organic matter is not 3%, you will have the amount of living organisms that lie usually to 3% of organic matter, because you are putting this amount of fresh organic matter on your soil every year. So that's the key. When you have that, you have an ability to reduce soil tillage, which is very high without taking too much risk. So that's the balance and the strategy that any farmers can do. And then about the fertilization strategy, it strongly depends the initial level of organic matter and the initial level of soil life, because for some crops we have to reinforce actually nitrogen or phosphorus during the early stage of the crop, because otherwise the crop cannot develop well. Because usually if you reduce soil tillage, that means you have less mineralization and you have to compensate in a way. And usually when we reduce fertilizers, it's not during the early stage of any crop, it's during the later stage, like for the second or the third application.
You also have different different dynamic of mineralization in these systems.
The mineralization comes later, I would say. So that's why also you should not sow at the same time than the neighbor. Usually you sow 2 or 3 weeks later, because you need hot soil and you need an active phase of mineralization. And usually when people want to sow exactly at the same time than the others, they kind of fail. The zero of vegetation exists. So if you plant the maize, you need 6 degrees per day, otherwise it doesn't work. So planting too early sometimes put you at risk. So just stay at home, clean the tractor or do something, and then sow a little bit after the others, because your system in strip till or in direct seeding will start later.
And how about some organic like matter that you can add into the system, like some external resources that you can add, like compost, manure, or what I saw in France when we visited it like a few years ago is some use of like wood, which is like a technique, cheap wood. It's not a technique usual in Czech Republic, I would say. What was the first ideas behind it when it came into farmers? How it came into like farmers' life? Because for me, it wouldn't come like as normal thinking to put wood on the field at first, you know.
So the first question is the feasibility of such techniques. Actually, I love those techniques because it shortens the time to get this organic status on. But if you have like 500 or 1,000 hectares, it's very difficult to find the materials. But what I like with those external organic matter is that you are boosting the level of carbon you are putting on your soil. So when I say, okay, you need like 15 tons of dry matter to get 3% of organic matter, of dry matter to get 3% of organic matter, you will get those 3% of organic matter after 10 or maybe 15 years, according to the type of soil and the climate you have. If you are putting compost or manure or wood chip in your soil, you can do that within like maybe 5, 6 or 7 years, which is very nice. And those organic matter are interesting in different ways. Like the wood will help to build the primary decomposers in the soil, such as earthworms, because they are feeding directly on that, and the wood is full of energy for them. You can also feed your fungi that needs high C/N ratio, and that's nice because usually earthworm and fungi are not so present in some soils.
I must say that usually when we found some pieces of wood in these fields in France, they were all the times covered in fungi and like white and
white with the ivy, which is very interesting. And we made some experimentation, or we supported some farmers that were doing this kind of practices successfully, and they transformed completely their soil within 5 years. But they were putting something like between 30 and 40 tons of such fresh organic matter every year. So that's why I said maybe the most difficult things with those techniques is the availability of this fresh organic matter to cover large surfaces. So that's why we are using a lot of those techniques for perennials, vegetables, because usually we have smaller piece of land and we can manage to find the resources. Usually for cereal cropping systems, we prefer to rely on good cover cropping, good crop rotation, and if we can, sometimes some like compost or manure. But at least we should reach 15 tons of dry matter per hectare and per year to be sure that the soil get enough energy to then be functional in terms of porosity, nutrient holding capacity, and water holding capacity. And we undervalue, I think, most of the time, the ability of a fertile soil to bumper some water stress, for instance. Of course, if you have very, very dry springs and summer, it cannot completely compensate. But usually you can get like something between 1 or 2 weeks of water availability more compared to a conventional soil. So that means you can wait this time more the next rainfall. So, I mean, it's always a matter of building like functionalities within the soil, and those functionalities usually are produced by living organisms. So that's why regenerating a soil is always regenerating the functional biodiversity you have in the soil. So it's like it's like you have animals. So usually you are a plant grower, but we should be an animal grower, like an earthworm grower.
I know a farmer
you know?
who says exactly the same thing. He's like, he has cows. He also has like crops, and he was like, so we have our unities of cows, we have our like crops, and now we are also thinking about these unities of like livestock, but in the soil. So we need to like feed these earthworms because they are like our cows. We need to feed them every day.
Yeah, and you know, like in RAE in France, did some studies, and or maybe that was Rennes University, but never mind. And they convert a fertile soil in equivalent of cows. So that means what is the weight of the global soil life, and they convert it in adult cows. So a fertile soil, if you weight all the different organisms you have in it, it's equivalent to 6 to 7 cows per hectare, which is incredible because
Just a good intensity.
usually if you do grazing, extensive grazing, you cannot put more than maybe 1 or 2 cows per hectare. So that's crazy when we think about that.
It's intensive ranching underground. And maybe now if we take a little bit look like from far away or from like a bigger perspective, because you also work with like big companies in agro-industry, what are their main goals and why are they getting interested in this regenerative farming?
I think they understood that natural resources are natural assets. And most of the food industry, luxury industry, cosmetic industry rely on natural resources, and especially agriculture, to make their product. If you take yogurt, for instance, it's milk and fruits and or sugar. If you think about a perfume, it's beetroot alcohol plus some iconic ingredients that can come from special crops, roses, iris, jasmine. If you think about a bag, it can be leather, it can be wool, it can be like, so everything is about agriculture at the end. And we are living the climate change, and it's huge. They see that as a major risk on their supply chains. So they want to do 2 things. The first one is comply with regulations that want a good impact on the environment. But they're also managing risk all along their supply chains. So for those 2 reasons, they need to change, they want to affect agricultural practices. On one hand, reducing the risk among their supply chains. On the other hand, complying with the regulation, specifically like everything around climate. So they need to reduce their carbon footprint. And usually between 30 and 60% of their carbon footprint comes from agricultural practices. And they need, in Europe at least, to measure and improve their impact on water and biodiversity. So that means complying with the regulation means having a good impact on the climate, water, and biodiversity. And it's a kind of a win-win situation because when they are doing so, usually they increase the resilience of their supply chains because the agricultural practices build a better soil, build a better landscape, lower their energy consumption, these kind of things. So that's the main reasons. And more and more in those big corporates, you have agronomists that are leading the sustainable department or that are leading the procurement. And when they're going to like develop a sustainable procurement strategy, they understand that they have to build like a fertile soil, for instance. That's a topic which is raising up a lot. 15 years ago when I started, I was speaking about soils, but people were just laughing at me. I was working with some pioneer farmers. I was working with few agronomists, but the research centers, the agricultural advisors, the cooperatives, everyone was laughing at me. And now everyone wants to build a fertile soil, and soils are in every mouth because you can store carbon in the soil, you can build your biodiversity, you can do, like, the soil is very important for water quality because it infiltrates and purify water, So, I mean, the soils are very important, and not only for the farmer, but also for the whole society. And I think more and more science has impulsed the right topic in those big companies, and I'm very glad, because I always thought that the private sector would lead this transition. Of course, the public sector is important for research, for being a kind of a third party. But at the end, those topics must be taken into account in real economy, and the private sector is the real economy. So, yeah, and we can see that also for the cooperatives and the wholesaler all over the world. Now they are building like regenerative supply chains or regenerative contracts for farmers. So it's not so high. Sometimes we can be kind of disappointed because we think that it will be like thousands and thousands of tons, but it's lower than expected most of the time. But at least that's something new. And we can see that among our projects, it accounts for hundreds of thousands hectares. So of course, on the earth, we have hundreds of millions hectares to cover. But at the end, I think more and more this good sustainable strategy for corporates are expanding. And I think they are positive for the farmer at the end.
Yeah, I think there is at least this dynamic and something is changing, and it's a good that it goes from both the public sector but also from the private sector.
Yeah.
And so that's a good way. But to conclude, to finish our interview, you also wrote a book about regenerative farming. Maybe you could say a few words about this book, and maybe it's also a source of information for our listeners to maybe learn more about regenerative farming.
So that's a book in French is L'agriculture qui régénère la nature. In English, it's the agriculture that regenerates nature. So it will be available within like 1 or 2 weeks in English. And everyone can buy it on Amazon. And I made this book because I wanted to deliver a clear picture of what can be the future of agriculture. And I want a future that is productive and protective. And I think regenerative agriculture and so-called regenerative agriculture, because I mean, regenerative agriculture is just good agronomy at large scale without compromises. And I wanted to clarify what it can be. So you have different like topic in this book. The first big chapter is about how to define sustainable agriculture and what is a real sustainable agriculture. Does it rely always on pesticides and fertilizers reduction or suppression, or is it linked to this soil and landscape functionality? And then I try to teach the reader how to recognize such agriculture visually. And then we have all the principles that help us to build a real sustainable agriculture. So it leads to explain, for instance, that the photosynthesis is at the heart of ecosystem regeneration and regenerative agriculture. And then, of course, I'm providing use cases and real-life examples to illustrate what it can be. So I do that for vineyards, cereals, and trees, fruit trees. So that's a kind of a package that anyone can read in less than 3 hours. That really provide everything to understand the topic. It's not like a very technical book because I wrote it for someone which is not an agronomist, but has some basis in science. And it's like for everyone.
So thank you again for coming into our podcast, and hopefully we have a bigger future with regenerative farming.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Project ReGENERATE is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the authors only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the Executive Agency can be held responsible for them.